anyway, Beaver Matters. I'm going to get rid of me and here we go. So if anything happens, sometimes the slides don't advance, just send me a chat or come in and talk and tell me, Catherine, okay? Because I'm kind of live remotely, but usually it behaves, but sometimes it doesn't. So, okay. So beavers are a critter that is really important and really interesting, and one I've taken a lot of shining to, as we say down in Texas where I grew up. As you know, I am a Master Wildlife Conservationist with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I spend a lot of time, a lot of research, a lot of studying and courses to try to be as up on all these fur-bearing animals as I can, so I can introduce you to them and hope you maintain a love of them and want to keep them and our environment safe. Here's a beaver. Most of these shots are shots I've taken from my canoe, generally speaking. This is a typical profile of the beaver. Didn't get the tail. It's hard to get the tail when you're at the same level practically as the beaver, but anyway, so the beavers, today's beavers are descended from the large bear-sized beavers, as you see on the left, of the Pleistocene epoch. So fossil records date them back some 1.5 million years ago. And they lived as recently as 12,000. I think we're happy that they aren't living now. These beavers weighed about 500 pounds, and their incisors could grow up to 6 inches long. In 2013, there was a remarkable discovery in Chicago's Wicker Park. There was one of these beaver fossils discovered, and it's now in their Natural History Museum there. Very, very important discovery. So this is one Latin name I can sort of pronounce. I did have 5 years of Latin, but when I really had a Texas accent, I had trouble pronouncing Latin. But Castor canadensis, generally the beavers kind of came down from Canada and spread throughout North America. They are distributed mostly through the forested regions of North America, from Alaska, Canada, but they do go down to northern Mexico, Nevada, and northern Florida. They are found all over Connecticut. They inhabit our rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, marshes, and other wetland sites. For them to take these areas as their home, they must provide adequate food and water depth so they can survive under the ice during winter. Their dams do help build that depth up. The large lakes that are prone to a lot of wave action, like, you know, Candlewood, Warramug down near you guys, not as conducive to beavers living there or building dams just because of the movement of the water. Fast moving streams and also areas with high fluctuating water levels are generally unsuitable for beavers, and also very arid regions like out west. In our state, historical records indicate that our beavers that were pretty much extirpated, that's a biologist's fancy word for they're no longer here, but they exist somewhere else. So the state decided they want to try to bring some beavers back. So they released a pair in Union, Connecticut, which is northeastern Connecticut, in 1914. Then there were sporadic releases in the late 20s and early 30s, and that reestablished isolated populations of beaver in the state, mostly in northwestern and northeastern Connecticut. Don't feel too bad. That's where a lot of our animals are, in northwestern and northeastern, but now they're all kind of migrating all over the state. They also began to move into Connecticut from New York and Massachusetts, where they also had similar restoration efforts. I'll tell you this again later, but beavers stay with their families until their second year. When they're subadults, then they have to go find their own place. So as you can imagine, sometimes they have to just keep moving until they find some waterways where they can establish their own territories. By the 50s, the small population of beavers present in the state, which were estimated only 20 colonies, and each colony could have maybe 8 to 10 beavers in it. They began causing troubles for landowners. You know, they were flooding roads, they were girding trees, doing all kinds of beaver things. So in response to the growing number of complaints and to manage the population, the state instituted a trapping season. Today, Our beaver population is abundant, and lodges and dams are frequently seen on various waterways. You can't really go too far on a Connecticut road without seeing some kind of marsh. And if you stopped and looked around, you probably see a beaver lodge or a dam. We estimate the population at around 10,000, but beavers are kind of hard to figure because the young stay in the lodges in their first year. They don't come out. So it's a little harder than land-based mammals to figure out the population. But in fact, there's more beavers in the state now than at any other time in the last 300 years. So pretty good rebound. They do exist today in a landscape that is really drastically different than that of pre-colonial times. They share their habitat with 3.5 million people on 3.2 million acres of land, which is largely dominated by residential, commercial, and industrial development. They're strong. Beavers are known as strong and steady enough to mold the earth with their labors. Native American beliefs believe that giant beavers fetch the mud with which the earth was built. And if you go around on a pond and see their scent mounds, which I'll show you pictures of later, it's not so far-fetched. But it is not such an outlandish idea when you consider that beavers in all their farms have lived on the continent for over 1 million years. That's a pretty long time. Long enough to have modified the majority of watersheds in North America. In fact, we owe much of our tillable, fertile land to their efforts. If you dig down in any farmer's field, you're likely to find silt, and if it was tested, that long ago had accumulated in the stillness of an ancient beaver pond. So pretty impressive. In building their dams, beavers are the only species besides humans that can create their own habitat, who can affect change over large habitat by building structures. Native Americans did rely heavily on beavers, not for food, medicine, tools, and clothing, and even quivers, as you see on the left there, for their arrows. They were also bartered and exchanged between different Native American groups, even before the European traders arrived. They were taken year-round as needed. And let me tell you that the Native Americans only took wildlife as they needed it. They only took wood as they needed it. So they were conservationists in that regard. So they would take these beavers, they'd use snares, spears, fall some dead trees into the water, and clubs, and they would also drain the ponds. So in a culture where all animals were respected for their practical and spiritual values, the beaver in Native American culture was generally honored, especially as a source of guidance on family matters. Here's a range. The beaver's native to Canada, as I said, the US and northern Mexico. It's not found in deserts in the Southwest, although they are trying now to repopulate some beavers out west because they found that they can serve as a fire break. So with a lot of these big fires that are out west and that are probably going to continue to happen, they think if they can get beavers established and they can thrive in a desert situation, it might help a lot with fire control. Pretty interesting study going on right now. They have been introduced in many other countries around the world. In fact, in England, their beavers are back after an absence of 400 years, and they're also back in Scotland. Some people are happy about it, some are not. So here's their current beaver range, is that tan color. So you can see they do stretch down throughout Texas and around. So primary, their range, as you can see, is up in the northeast and the northern parts of Canada. Secondary, which means there's, a fair population, but not an overpopulation, is that orangey color. And then tertiary would just be just a random beaver moving out somewhere. All those black dots are historical beaver trading posts. And pretty much, Lewis and Clark went out west and they were beaver fur traders. A lot of the beaver traders that started here in New England, once they'd extirpated all the beavers here, they started moving out west. And then a lot of the settlers followed those beaver paths that the early beaver trappers had gone on to go out west. So kind of interesting. There were 60 to 100 million beaver in North America prior to the arrival of the Europeans. I'm always fascinated how they come up with these numbers, but I guess they're pretty accurate. Today, there are about 6 to 12 million. That's only 1/6 of their original population. Again, as I said, in Connecticut, we estimate somewhere around 10,000. The high value placed on beaver pelts during the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries is what led to their near extirpation completely from North America. Their pelts were used in winter clothing, as jackets and boots, but the primary use for pelts were in the construction of felted hats. From the 1600s through the 1800s, felt was made from the hairs of the undercoat of the beaver and shaped into a wide range of popular hats, as you can see here. Today, the Queen's Buckingham Guards still wear hats made out of beaver, and the finest cowboy hats today still use beaver fur, the felt-like cowboy hats, the Stetsons, although a lot of them now have come to some other substitute that seems like it feels the same. So anyway, for 2 centuries after the colonists arrived, the pelts were an important medium of exchange in North America, helped finance the colonies really. They would send the pelts overseas. They didn't pay the Indians much to collect them, yet they got high prices for them, and they were in great demand in Europe. When the Hudson Bay Company, which did operate in New England, monopolized the fur trade using Native Americans mostly to trap the beaver, they'd only give them a pittance, but they did come up with this coin that's on the bottom right, and that's called a made beaver, M-A-D-E beaver. The worth of one male beaver pelt harvested in the winter months would give you one of these made beavers. It would give you a sword. So one made beaver would be a sword. 4 made beavers could buy a gallon of brandy, and 6 would buy you boots. So we kind of see what their priorities back then was. Many of you probably heard the name John Pynchon. Pynchons are a famous family in New England between 1652 and 57. He was from Springfield. He sold 8,992 beaver pelts only from the Connecticut River drainage. Pretty amazing. So anyway, this demand for the fur did allow North American colonies to pay off a lot of their debts, as did clearing a lot of forests and using a lot of the chestnut, which was the predominant tree here in New England when the colonists first came here. They'd send them overseas. Masts for ships were made out of those, and furniture. So by the mid-1800s, most of the East had been cleared of forest. And mind you, we were over 90% forested when the colonists came here. And thousands of acres of wetlands were drained for agriculture. And as the settlers pushed westward, they kept up this same land practice. It's almost was like scorch and burn, not setting fires necessarily, but, they just were cutting everything down, killing everything. At the time, there were no laws that regulated the harvest of beavers or either most other species of wildlife. But the loss of habitat and unregulated harvest really extirpated the beavers mostly from most of North America. And again, by the mid-1800s, actually about 1820, they no longer existed in Connecticut or the northeastern US. So you can see the beaver fur. It's pretty impressive. This landowner, a Dutch landowner, said the beaver is the main reason for the initial settlement of this fine country by Europeans. The fur is made into the best hats that are worn throughout Europe. And I like the way he's doffing his hat with his hand there. Anyway, a beaver's fur consists of long, coarse guard hairs. They're about 10 times the diameter of their soft, wavy, short underfur. So they have that 2 coats of fur. The guard hairs do overlay that luxurious underfur. Their longest are between 2 and 2.5 inches long, and they're most dense along the back, as you can kind of see here. But the underfur also attains its greatest length up to 1.2 inches on the back, and can range from a dark gray to a light chestnut color. Most of our beavers are pretty much this color. You'll see beavers in a more southerly or a place that sun's closer to the earth. They bleach out a little. I was pretty dark brown hair growing up in Texas, but by the end of summer, it'd get pretty light. The slaughter of beavers did transfigure our waterways in North America. In a healthy beaver-rich creek or stream, dams slow the water flows, capture sediment, and counteract erosion. But after the beavers, after they left and their, what I call their damn speed bumps disappeared, the streams eroded into their beds and they cut these deep gullies in a process called incision. And you can see these on a lot of lands. These steep-sided, what straight-jacketed streams lost the ability to spill onto the floodplain, which would recharge aquifers. So some groundwater-fed streams dried up altogether. So quite an alarming effect by getting rid of beavers. Beavers have 20,000 hairs per 1/3 of a square foot. Imagine that. Some of the thickest fur in the animal world. And they also have the densest, warmest, and most waterproof of all. So if you remember in the 20s and 30s, a lot of people were wearing beaver furs as coats, and overseas they wore them many decades ago. In fact, the beavers have as many hairs in an area smaller than a dime than humans have on our heads. It's not counting you bald-headed guys, sorry. But anyway, with approximately 12,000 to 23,000 hairs per square centimeter, they have more hair per skin area than the South American nutria, which has a lot of hair, and it's a smaller animal, 8,000 to 3,000 hairs, but less than our river otter, which has 25,000 to 51,000 hairs. And I wonder who sits there and counts these things, you know, like you know, in the eagle, you know, has 7,200 feathers. And I'm thinking, did they get a lot of, you know, dead eagles and count them and then do an average? I mean, do they count these furs? I'm not sure, but it's kind of like, to me, the pennies in a jar, but at least, the very least, it can illustrate just how important this fur is to this animal. Trapping plus habitat loss from the clearing of forest lands led to the diminishment of beaver populations in the US to less than 100,000 by the 20th century. And again, as I said, today the Queen's Guards do have beaver fur on their hats. I have a visiting dog, so sometimes she barks. So beavers are a keystone species, which means that they have a disproportionately large effect on their environment relative to their abundance. Their role is similar to the old construction of a block, the top block in an arch. If you pull that block out, the entire structure crumbles. They do, however, play a critical role in the watersheds of North America by maintaining the structure of the surrounding ecological community. Their presence in watersheds affects not only the types and numbers of many terrestrial and aquatic plants and animal species, but also maintains the change over time of channel form and the hydrology of watersheds. And that sifting of that silt and cleaning of it is very important. Again, as I said to architects, that keystone is the center block. And if you pull that block out, you know, it falls down. An ecosystem engineer is an organism that creates, changes, or destroys a habitat. So again, as I said, that's pretty much what beavers do and we do. There's perhaps no clearer example of a keystone species or engineer than the beaver. River ecosystems rely on beavers to take down old or dead trees along riverbanks to use in making their dams. And people think, wow, they're just getting rid of all the trees, but guess what? That allows new, healthier trees to grow in abundance and spring up in more abundance. Moving shoreline trees, beavers let in a flood of sunlight, more sunlight than before, and that encourages more palatable shrubs and saplings such as aspens, birches, and willows, which are the favorite food of beavers and the favorite trees to fell. But by removing this overstory, which are these big dead trees, beavers do make way for the other trees and helps them grow, and that accelerates the aging process of a forest around the edges of ponds. So here are some of the species that I've gotten from my canoe that thrive in wetland habitats created by beavers. There's the painted turtle on the left, the osprey, lily pads, and of course our very stern looking eagle. That's like a look an eagle has a lot of times. They can be very stern looking. Many trout and salmon populations also rely on beaver dams to sort sediment and regulate water flow. Without beavers to build the dams, populations of these fish would decline rapidly. Fish are food for a lot of carnivores and omnivores. Beavers, again, as I said, create wetlands which benefit plants, frogs, birds, bear even, all kinds of fur-bearing animals, aquatic plants, just really amazing things they do. So I can't emphasize that enough. So the beaver is a rodent like rats, mice, and squirrels. It's North America's largest rodent. I was paddling on the Bantam River in Litchfield one day, and I came around the corner, and here was this very angry beaver. I didn't know it was there, but there it was right on the shore, like probably 5 feet from me and hissing at me. And I think it's a fighter because if you look at his tail, he's got a little chunk out of it. But anyway, he was very angry and very muddy, but I quickly got out of the way. I took a quick picture and left. Adult beavers can weigh between 30 and 65 pounds. Imagine that. And they're typically 24 to 36 inches long. That's just their body. Then you have to add 12 to 18 inches for their tail. They're what are considered semi-aquatic rodents that live in and around water with a body that's uniquely suited to the environment that they inhabit. This heavy-bodied animal, and it is very heavy-bodied, has powerful muscles but very short legs, and they're very slow moving on land, but they're very well adapted for life in a semi-aquatic environment. On land, they walk typically on all 4 legs, but if they're carrying mud or sticks, they may hold the materials in their front paws and walk very stiffly upright. They can live up to 15 or 20 years in the wild. In captivity, one beaver lived to be 25 years old, so fairly long lived for a mammal. Beaver's soft pelts, as I said, will range in color from black to brown to reddish brown to blonde. When they dive, air bubbles are trapped beneath the underfur next to the beaver's skin, and this gives them tremendous insulating qualities that allow them to be out in icy waters. One of their 5 toenails is split, and it helps them groom themselves. They're very fastidious, so they'll oftentimes sit and be grooming themselves. Their hind legs are webbed for swimming. They have a flat, almost hairless tail, about 12 to 16 inches long. As you can see, that is pretty impressive. That helps them navigate their watery environment and to balance upon as they stand on their hind legs, gnawing on trees and other plants. And no, like Disney says, they do not use their tail to pat down the mud. While generally clumsy and unbalanced on land, they're incredibly graceful and elusive in water, where they use their webbed rear feet to propel them and their tail to steer. They also use their tail as a warning to people. I was paddling on Stillwater Pond in Torrington in that top picture, and a beaver was this. I zoomed in on this. I was pretty far away. I never crowd an animal, so I just do the best I can, trying to be far away. And this is a beaver splashing. You can kind of see in the middle of the body there. It's very hard to get a perfect shot because it's very quick. And then down here, there's one in a pond in Norfolk. So they do that as a warning sign to whatever they perceive as danger. They also do it, to warn their lodge that there's something going around. And they also do it just because they can. So some of them are just, they like to do it. I've been on a pond before, and I can be like nowhere near where they even hardly know I'm there anymore, and they might still be splashing their tail. So it's always fun to track things. It's very difficult to find beaver tracks unless you want to get a lot of mud, go out in waders and sink in the mud. But a friend of mine out west, he's a Vietnam vet, and he had that lighter back in Vietnam. He at least knows that if you're looking at a track, you need to put something down to measure it if you don't have a ruler or something. So as you can see on the left, he used his lighter. On the right, another friend of mine took this photo. On the bottom right, they had a tape measure. And on the top is another, what we call scat. This is interesting because I know it seems gross, but animal poop, which is called scat, is also very important in trying to identify animal species, their movements, what they're eating, stuff like that. And you can kind of see the beaver pretty much eats woody stuff because that top scat is pretty much all wood, like almost like shredded up, after you saw a piece of lumber. Okay, again, the tail is one of their most distinguishing and identifiable features, like none other around. it is used as a prop when they're cutting trees, a rudder during swimming, an alarm, and a fat reserve for lean months. And it also is a heat exchange organ, which helps reduce heat loss from 25% in the summer to 2% in the winter. Pretty fascinating. This is a blurry shot, but I was happy to get the head and the tail in this little slap. And here was the end result. So there again, you can see another beaver slap. I'm just kind of fascinated by the beaver slap. So they do slap their tail, not just because they see a canoeist around, but a lot of predators like bear, bobcat, otter, they'll walk right over dams made by beavers, go to their lodges, try to get in. But the beaver is a very good builder, and it's very hard to penetrate their lodges. Beavers do have a keen sense of smell, which helps them find food sources and identify family members and avoid predators. So there you can kind of see the back of that beaver as it's slapping its tail. So a friend of mine, Janet Pesatoro, she's a PhD biologist and has been one for a long time. She now is into what's called camera trapping, which is using a game cam with a DSLR camera. But in this book of hers, and I don't get any kickbacks for this, but I just think it's really fascinating, a great book. And even if you didn't use a DSLR camera and just use the game cam, in this book, she shows you how to set them up, how to figure out the best place to put them out there. A lot of the game cams are very affordable now, and it's really fun to go out and find out what you've seen. Some are, controlled by Wi-Fi, but you can just get a regular one that you go out. And she also has a field guide to most of the animals we have in New England in there. So, but I'm very grateful to her because she lets me use these great photos that she gets on her game cam. So you can see this is wintertime and a bobcat is up starting to go across a beaver lodge. Of course, it's not going to get in there, but again, beavers are prey animals. So their eyes are widely spaced, which is true of a lot of prey animals. Look at that bunny down below. It helps give them a large field of vision. They do use their acute sense of smell to detect predators, as I said, and they'll get, so a lot of these animals you'll see going across. This is another of Janet's photos. It's well known that beaver lodges are important resources for other species. Some birds use them as nesting platforms. Some mammals den inside them. Beavers, for some odd reason, allow muskrat to come in during the winter. But one little known fact is that beaver lodges are also diving platforms for mischievous bear cubs. So here's a bear yearling going up. You can see the mother coming off to the right there. Then the little one's about to jump off as the mother comes up. So pretty fun. Here's a nighttime shot of a bear going across a beaver lodge, not in winter probably. So here's a beaver gathering material. In the fall, they'll start really packing a lot of mud on the outside of their beaver lodge and a lot more sticks. If you look up to the top center of the photo, you'll see a lot of looking like a bunch of sticks and stuff. That's they'll cut down sapling trees and put them alongside the lodge in the fall, and that they use that as food resource in the winter. So pretty interesting. This is a goose's nest that was up on a beaver lodge. Pretty fascinating. They even use their own down to help the nest. Teeth are the business tool of the industrious beaver. Their cartoonish signature top and bottom incisors file each other down into sharp chisel-like tools and make short work of many thick logs. They can be up to 1 inch long. Their orange color comes from their diet, which is structurally fortified with iron, which gives them the most powerful and durable teeth in the animal kingdom. The teeth never stop growing, so they have to constantly file them down by gnawing on trees and grinding their teeth together. The orange enamel on the front of the incisors, which, as I said, contains iron, it does wear down slower than the white dentin on the backside of the teeth, which are just like our dentin and our teeth, which allows the teeth of the beaver to self-sharpen as it chews through wood. They are the only North American mammal to fell large trees, except, of course, humans. The trees they cut on average are from 7.8 inches to 53.5 inches around, pretty big. Beaver skeletons are massive when compared to those of other mammals of similar length. Beavers have massive skulls that include large incisor teeth with chisel-like cutting edges. The molars are used to crush and grind plant material. The deep groove that you see there houses a large muscle that closes their lower mandible, and their jaw joint is placed high on the skull, way above the tooth rows, which can meet in parallel. That makes their skull and their mandible are thick and heavy and provides a strong foundation for those large incisors. A less rugged skull, even like ours, would be unable to withstand the physical stress and strain of jaw muscle contractions of sufficient strength to cut hardwood such as oak. So pretty impressive skull they have. A friend of mine in my area, Cheryl, is a great photographer. She, unlike me, has a great lens too, but aside from that, she's also a very, very great photographer. So she loans me her pictures a lot of times. In preparing branches, sticks, and logs for insertion in their dams, beavers will peel the, I don't say that word right, that Texas accent, peel the stick smooth, similar to that smoothness that you have if you're whittling on a stick with a pocket knife. In so doing, they generally eat the inner bark, which is called cambium. It's a sugary tissue. It's almost like I remember when I was a kid, we used to get sugar cane. Of course, it's not hard like a stick, but boy, you would suck on that stuff and it was nice sugar. Beavers tend to gnaw trees in a circular pattern around the trunks. The stumps, when they're finished, end up pointed and scarred with broad tooth marks. You can see those there. Some marks may be higher up, indicating the work was done in winter when the beaver was standing on snow. Pretty important. Branches used to build lodges will often have the bark peeled off. The adult beavers on average can cut over 200 trees per year and consume 2 pounds of wood per day. It takes them only about 10 minutes to fell a 3-inch diameter tree, and you say, heck, you know, as long as I can get my chainsaw started, I can cut that thing in a second, you know. But anyway, they're using their teeth. They've been known to labor for hours over a record 60-inch circumferent tree. I'm going to play this sound. It has some gnawing and then some of their little noises. That's their tail splash on you. Oh, sorry, it stopped. Hold on, we're not quite done with that. So that last sound you hear are the young ones in the lodge and the adult gnawing outside of there. I was very happy when I was down home for Christmas. These are my great nephews who I love dearly, and they like their old aunt a lot. And we were down by the Arkansas River in Oklahoma, and early one morning, and we discovered this beaver gnawed tree. But the really cool thing about it is it showed the tail drag. So I told you, remember that they cut in circular patterns. So you can see on the left there in front of the boys how they dragged their tail as they went around the tree. And then on the right here, they dragged it again. And I was just so ecstatic, not only that these guys got to see this, but also that I was able to get photos of this. Because, you know, a lot of times the trees they're working on are in the woods. You're maybe not going to see that. My rancher friend who owns this ranch wasn't so happy because he has a campground there, and this tree was going to get pretty messed up. So again, here they are, my nephews pointing out the tail drag. And again, as I said, they were very excited to be able to see that, and I was excited to teach them about it. This is a beaver I saw on a marsh near me, and it's in kind of the middle left. And it's not the greatest photo, but you get to see it. It's eating It's obviously not going to be able to pull this big tree. So sometimes when they fell these larger trees, they don't become part of a dam. They take the branches off the trees, but they will eat the cambium in the tree for food. And that's what this beaver is doing right now. So at the end there, it was pooping. I hate to say that again, but I meant to say when I was showing you their scat, you very rarely find beaver scat because it's usually in the water. So anyway, a beaver's sensory orifices are uniquely adapted for its semi-aquatic existence. I was happy to be able to use the word orifices in a sentence, but it does describe what they have. One of their most fascinating facts about them is that they can see underwater. They have 3 sets of eyelids. The third is a set of transparent eyelids called a nictitating membrane. A lot of animals, bald eagles, bobcats, other animals have this. It's an opaque covering that covers their eyes and keeps debris out. So this way they can retain vision while underwater with this covering over their eyes. They have valves that close in their ears. This I've never been able, there's no photos anybody I know has of these, but the valves close in their ears and nose, but they also have fur-lined lips that seal behind their teeth that to prevent them from swallowing water or drowning while they carry sticks underwater. As you can see, this one with the sticks there. So pretty interesting. So with all of these things, they're pretty well adapted for their semi-aquatic existence. Imagine having built-in goggles for your eyes. I never like to open my eyes underwater. But despite all this, they do have rather poor eyesight, but they do make up with an excellent sense of hearing and smell. So, so here, a friend of mine took this video not long ago, and the challenge to get a good shot of a beaver from above, so maybe you can see their tail, and in a still photo in a little bit, you might see the tail, and I'm gonna use Photoshop to make it more visible one of these days. But here's a video of a beaver coming out off the shore. I think at that point, the beaver was kind of aware that there were people above, not afraid, but just, you know, aware that they were there. So here's a typical profile of a beaver's head as they swim along. I was able to get this shot from my canoe. Here's another side profile, very typical. Here they are underwater. They can hold their breath for 15 minutes underwater, so they can stay underwater for a long time. You might be waiting to take a photo of them, and then they go underwater, and you think, oh, they're going to come up near me, and then they'll come up 300 yards away, you know, because they can hold their breath so long. Here they are as they go beneath the water. They kind of go in a circular pattern. Here they are turning. Here's eating. So in the summer, as I said, they'll eat all kinds of plants. They eat lily pads, they'll eat other green plants. They do prefer willows and aspens, or some of the cottonwoods are their favorite trees to eat, like from the limbs and the leaves. But if they don't have that as much, they'll eat all this other stuff. They're strictly vegetarians. They're called choosy generalists, which means they have stuff they prefer, but above others, but they'll sample and utilize a wide variety of plant materials when the others are not available. If they don't have aspen, cottonwood, or willow, they'll substitute birch, maple, ash, alder, and other woody plants. They do eat the inner bark of the twigs, the leaves, shoots, and roots. And during the summer, they will sometimes eat non-woody herbaceous plants like grasses, aquatic plants, even algae. Where ponds or streams freeze during winter, they build these food caches. You can see off to the right. Near their lodges or burrows, they can access them by swimming under the ice as long as the water level is high enough. Because they don't hibernate or migrate during cold winter months, a reliable supply of food is necessary, and this is what they have. And even though they're often surrounded by them and even help juvenile coho salmon survive and thrive in their first year by providing still waters and pools to rest in, beavers do not eat fish. So if you are fans of the Chronicles of Narnia, where they say that Mr. and Mrs. Beaver are eating fish, not true. They don't eat fish. I'm not saying in the life of all beavers in the world, one didn't eat fish, but generally no. That on the right is a river otter. It does eat fish. It is the carnivore. So especially when I talk to libraries, I like to include some literature. If you like esoteric literature, this is pretty interesting. This woman, Frances Backhouse, wrote this book called Once They Were Hats, and she writes about the relationships between beavers and water lilies. She visited this one lake where beavers had long been absent, but were later reintroduced. And she noted the changes in vegetation due to beaver activity. And water lilies were one of the many plant species that were impacted. So she said when beavers embed uneaten sticks into dams or lodges or leave them lying on moist soil, the cuttings sometimes sprout and grow. And sometimes you can see on a beaver lodge, they'll be like, they put these branches there and you'll see all this vegetation growing off the top of there. Sometimes you'll even see flowers. So pretty interesting. I was paddling last year and I came up on this thing and I don't know, I thought it was beautiful, but it kind of skeeved me out. I thought, what was it, from outer space? So my friend came over there and we picked it up and I found out later it's a lily pad tuber root. So this is down on the bottom of the water holding up all the stems and stuff of the lily pads. And when it comes up, it looks like this before it dies and gets color of dead wood. So beaver lodge with saplings, see, you can see that cache there. They do build up extra fat reserves for the winter, including on their tails to survive the winter, but they do store these food piles as well. The sticks are stacked near their lodge and then they can just access it from their many tunnels underneath, which you'll see an illustration of later. It's a winter disaster for a beaver colony if the water level is too low and ice seals them into their lodge. It can result in starvation. So they do work busily in the fall to shore up their dams before winter set in. If you are paddlers and you get your jollies going over a beaver dam, particularly in the fall, please don't do it. Walk around, because every time you make a breach in that dam, they have to go repair it before they keep building the dam up. So not a good thing to do. Here's a beaver you can see with a pretty large stick carrying it. There's when you saw that with the different debris. The beaver lodge, these are various lodges around my part of Connecticut and just in the southern Berkshires near me. I live in Barkhamsted. The beaver lodge consists of underwater tunnels that lead up into the lodge to an elevated nesting platform, and they line those with wood chips and other nesting material. As again, they are family oriented and typically will live in colonies to up to 8 beavers, the 8 consisting of kits, 1 and 2-year-old offspring, and sharing the lodge. The lodge is a very complex architecture. They all look a little different with many entrances and exits. And again, they have that cache of food. They plaster mud on the outside to strengthen it. Here's what I call the double wide. This one is 2 lodges. Oftentimes when beavers take up at another water area, they'll build what's called a bank lodge. So they'll build on right next to the shore while they're going out and trying to build their other lodge. But this way they are somewhat protected, but not as protected. Even though predators like bobcats, beavers, bobcats, bears, and river otters can all swim, they're not likely to go way out in the middle of a pond. They generally only will access a beaver lodge from shore or across a dam. Again, beavers do create their own habitat by building dams of sticks and mud and flowing water, and this creates quiet, deep ponds. Their dens may be dug, as I said, in the banks, but the main beaver lodge is their large, distinctive lodge, which is usually built in the pond or stream. Usually they're domed, as you saw with these, and the entrances and exits to the lodge are underwater, and the building chambers above line. So here's one in last fall I took, and you can see they've been adding to it a lot of mud just to get it ready for the winter. They are monogamous and typically mate for life. They typically breed in the winter and give birth in the spring, producing only one litter a year. After reaching sexual maturity at 2, the young beavers, usually it's 2+, a little more than 2 years old, they will disperse, find a mate, and set up a new colony. So here's a few more, just another look at a bank lodge there. So here's kind of what the lodges look like. So you see like the nesting area up there, and then all these little channels going under. Now, a lot of lodges aren't right next to the dam. I think they just, this is a very old print, copyright free. I think this artist put this in just to show you the dam and the other things. But generally speaking, the dams are not right next to the lodge. There's another look at it. Little ones inside. Here you can see the babies here. Pretty cute. They're called kits. They're born, as I said, in the late spring. They're only just about a pound, but unlike a lot of other mammals, they're fully furred when they're born. A beaver litter can have between 1 and 9 kits. It's hard to know for sure what each beaver has every year because, as I said, they keep them inside the lodge for a year. These newborns can walk and swim as soon as they're born, but the adults keep them either in the lodge or right next to it. They don't let them go very far. There's too many predators and it's too dangerous for a young kid to be on its own. So they'll spend their time eating, growing, and learning, and the other ones born the year before will help the parents take care of the young. Although they're generally sociable animals, the exception to this is when they work. Beavers work independently and tend to have little contact with each other while working on their dams. I was happy to get this shot of 2 beavers side by side. It was, probably 7:30 in the evening, and I saw them, and I could only shoot through the reeds. I couldn't access them any other way, but was happy to get it. So. Beavers establish their territories by creating scent mounds, and I can tell you the one on the left is pretty large. They mark their territories by mixing their pungent castoretum, which is the scent musk that they have, with mud and leaves. Many of the biologists call these mud pies, but they're not very palatable smelling, I can tell you. But they are mounds of mud marked with drops of their castoretum, a musk that beavers use to communicate their presence to other animals and to mark their territory. There are 50 different volatile substances in castoretum, and every beaver has a unique odor signature. And somebody said to me when I last gave this talk, "What do you mean volatile? They explode?" I know, yeah, they explode your sense of smell because they're pretty nasty smelling. Humans used to use castoretum in perfume. I think it's not allowed now, also to leave memorable messages. In some areas, there could be from 40 to 120 of these mounds within a home range of a beaver family. And let me tell you, when you're near them, you can smell them. So on the right, that's also scent mounds. They're just not that big. Beavers construct channels leading away from their lodge. They sometimes dig them into the forest so they can harvest their trees without crossing land. And a lot of times these will fill up with water. Here you see this, so their channel filled up with water. They have a talent for digging to create these channels throughout the pond and around the lodge, so they will have water even during droughts and long winters when the top few feet of a pond can turn to ice. So beavers are known for constructing dams. They're dam busy. They construct dams across streams because those resulting ponds extend their access to trees that either swallowed or approached by the rising waters. They can be constructed of mud and plant materials, dredged and hauled up from beneath the water surface, and can measure from a foot high to up to 10 feet high. More often, they are very complex structures. They have cut branches and small logs filled and cemented with mud, decomposing debris and rocks found below the surface of the water. As I said, they can be very high. The largest dam known is here in the Grand Tetons, and it's 10 feet high and 2,970 feet in length. So, and you can see a giant beaver lodge back on the top, the middle right there. Until recent improvements in remote sensing from outer space, beaver dams were one of the few animal signs visible from space, not counting, human development. Beavers start this dam by carrying long lengths of wood to the side in their mouths, so even sometimes 5 to 6 feet long. They'll take one end of each of these in the stream bottom with the opposite end facing up into the current, so they kind of stick it down vertically. Then they get more sticks and branches of smaller length. They pile them on, and these are caught by the longer links, creating kind of a lattice upon which mounds and mounds of mud, muck, and other dredged items are placed and packed down by the force of the water and by the beavers themselves until the dam is nearly waterproof. Most dams will be a little water leaking through, but not too much. Unlike in cartoons, as I say, they do not pack mud with their tails, but they do on occasion walk while they're carrying things in their arms. So they are great architects. I mean, this really shows you that lattice work of how well they can put these dams together. Most of the dams, once they're really well constructed, a lot of animals will use these to get across a pond. So they'll walk all the way across this beaver dam to get on the other side rather than, say, in the winter, go in the cold water. So oftentimes you'll see bear, even deer, coyotes, otter, of course, bobcats going across. This is a friend of mine on his game cam at night. This is a beaver getting ready to start working on the dam. Here's some noise. And so here's what happens after winter sometimes. Sometimes these dams break up, and then the beavers are going to have to come back. This was in the early spring near me. They have to come back and get to work again. So their work is never finished. Here's a breach. This is the sort of thing that kayakers cause, or canoeists, by thinking it's fun to go right through the middle rather than walk around. This is a beaver dam near me in American Legion State Forest, and it's covering a road, but the road really essentially didn't go very far beyond. And it's kind of a horizontal dam. It doesn't have much height to it, but it has created like a beautiful wetland in an area really of the forest that isn't used. So there's a lot of wood ducks, eagles come there, osprey, all kinds of animals use this marsh now. Here's a place on the Bantam River and White Memorial Foundation where I think they should have a sign, because people just keep going up and down this in the autumn, and it's really a bad thing. So here's beavers working at night. As you see, they're by themselves, so they're starting to add sticks to their dam. A lot of times they bring the sticks up when it's still daylight. They come out, like if you ever want to go to a marsh and beavers are there, you have to go kind of right before dark. But if you get there about an hour before and just get a chair and your sandwich and sit around, they'll start coming out with little exploratory swims. And sometimes they'll take the debris they're going to use for the dam and just set it by the dam. And then at night they start doing their night work. So it's kind of fun to see, but in the dark, you'd have to be there a long time to see them. Internally, beavers are metabolic miracles. No other animal can digest fibrous cellulose and tough woody lignin so well. They have a knack for coprophagy, I have trouble with the word, which means, it's kind of gross, they eat their poop to squeeze out a second round of nutrients. But this, not only does this help them, but so too does the fact their intestine is about 6 times the length of their body, which is pretty incredible. And they eat 1 to 4.5 pounds per day, and it takes 60 hours for that food to pass through their systems. But when it does, like many species, it spreads nutrients and other matter that over time becomes rich matter for ecosystems. So this is typically what beaver gnawed trees would look like. It's a fresh one on the left, one on the right is probably a year or two old. They sometimes get that hourglass type figure. Here's a really huge tree that I'm pretty sure they didn't chew this tree down. I think it fell, but once it fell, they came and chewed the side. They probably took all the, all the branches off of it, but then they came back and used this tree for nutrient. It looks like on that bottom one on the left, they were trying to chew through it and then probably just gave up and decided this is just a good feast place for us to come to and get things to eat. They do, as I said, gnaw trees using those large incisors, and they trim off the large and small branches to use on their dam and for food. Again, the partially gnawed ones you might come across usually have an hourglass shape, or if you see those more saplings, they'll have that point to them. Pretty amazing thing. This is a friend of mine's son near a pretty big tree. I couldn't resist the cartoon. You did all this? Wow, you're good. They do spend their whole lives cutting down trees, building lodges and dams along streams. Again, the dams do catch water and hold it there and make these valuable wetlands. Many animals do depend on these things. I can't emphasize that enough. One interesting fact, though, they are not truly lumberjacks. They cannot control the way the tree falls, and on occasion it does fall on them. Typically, a lot of the trees will fall towards the water because they're wet and they've kind of been growing that way, but there have been some incidences of people finding dead beavers under trees. So, so there you can see one cut in the winter. There's a little beaver working away there. You see those vertical limbs, those vertical branches there. So busy as a beaver and eager beaver cliches built on wood solid truth. I couldn't resist the pun. They've been recognized as hard workers for several centuries, but we think the linguists think it was the 20th century when the phrases busy as a beaver and eager beaver became popular. They find their origins around the late 30s, 40s into the mid 50s. They think it's possible that this idiom became popular because of the loose rhyme between eager and beaver. Some sources speculate it may be related to the idiom busy as a beaver, which is also refers to someone who is very industrious. But most sources state that it really gained popularity with the armed forces during World War II, and it originally referred to a soldier who was excited to impress his superiors by performing duties that others would not like to do. So this expression can have either a positive or a negative connotation. Sometimes people use it to show how hardworking and energetic a person is. Other times people use it sarcastically to show that a person is trying too hard. So I want to show you what I call aquatic doppelgangers not. These three species are oftentimes mistaken by people as each other. Many a kayaker, canoeist, fisher person, or nature enthusiast has at one time or another thought one of these three species was the other. Because we're home to all three here in Connecticut, I thought I'd give you a few things to help you differentiate between the beaver, the river otter, and the muskrat. The muskrat's there at the top, the beaver in the middle, river otter down below. The muskrat is the smallest of our furry aquatic trio. There they all are. This isn't to size because the beaver would be obviously much taller than the muskrat, but it's hard to find pictures that you can show the size that well. But anyway, the muskrat, which is the top right, is the smallest. It's medium-sized rodent. They can range from 16 to 28 inches, but you have to add another 7 to 11 for their tails. But they only weigh up to 4 pounds, so 1.5 to 4 pounds, so pretty small. We don't generally have the benefit of side-by-side when we see these animals in the wild. So saying one is big and one is small may not help you much. But trust me, muskrats are significantly smaller than the beaver or otter. A difference of 2 feet in length, including the tail, versus 3 to 5 feet. If you see the profile of that muskrat on the top, if you saw that muskrat, you know, across a river on a riverbank across the river, a lot of people mistake it for a beaver because when a beaver hunches, it does look similar to that, but look at the tail, how skinny it is. Now, if it's too far away and you don't have binoculars, it's easily mistaken for a beaver, even though, as I said, if a beaver was standing right next to it in the same pose, there'd be no question as to what it was. So the main difference is that tail. Sometimes when they're swimming, the tail may be curved slightly out of the water, even pointing straight up as erect as an antenna, kind of like a chipmunk. That's the muskrats. Give me a take a drink of water. Beavers, on the other hand, you look for that wide, flat tail, but as I told you, even though it's kind of there just below the surface, because it's dark, it's sometimes hard to see, but that is a dead giveaway that it's a beaver. And they're also much more rotund than muskrats. And what about the otters? River otters are 21 to 20 to 32 inches long, and then their tails are 11 to 20 inches. They can weigh up to 30 pounds, depending on food availability. Unlike the beaver and the muskrat, they are carnivores. They're members of the weasel family. Excuse me, and their favorite foods are fish, but they'll also eat amphibians, turtles, and crayfish. I was on tracking certification last September in Maine, you know, and I was up there, I was all ready. I knew all the forest animals, I knew all the tracks, I knew their sign, and guess where they take us? To a beach. I'm like, wait a second, what are we doing on a beach? And then we went to like an inland marsh, but it was still a salt marsh. And they showed us this stuff. It was elongated and all white. And you could see some pink. So you knew there was like some crayfish there. And I'm like, what the heck? And I knew what otter scat looked like, but I didn't know it was white when they eat certain kinds of fish. So I was totally tricked. But anyway, the main difference with otters, so there's a muskrat. I meant to show you that. There's another picture. You can see the little tail there. And here's a river otter, great, great critters. The main difference with swimming river otters, you often just see the head and neck, not the full length of the body. They're more curved when they're in the water and kind of more sleek, more narrow and elongated. And their tail usually is just beneath the surface. When they pick up speed, they'll often start porpoising. So they're kind of look like a dolphin when it swims, or make shallow dives as they race through the water. They dive a lot more frequently than beavers or muskrats, and they're more energetic. They hang out in groups a lot more than muskrats and beavers. Though beavers and muskrats will seen in larger family groups, they're usually spotted only alone or in pairs, unlike the muskrat. So you can see the beaver, some more pictures of the beaver, and there's a beaver from above. Now on the left, if you just barely look, you can just see like the tail a little bit. And like I said, if I get, because it's in the shadow there, if I get a little Photoshop, I can lighten that probably, but I didn't have time. So my friend Gina took this. Minks, we also have, not typically mistaken for those three animals, but as you see, they could be. Nick Jacomi's great photographer. He loaned me these pictures to use. But when they're swimming, and they don't swim as much as the others, but they do swim, they could be mistaken, but they are also very small. So that brings us to beaver-human conflicts, which there are a lot. So flooding, tree cutting, damage to man-made structures, impacts on other natural resources, water quality and public health issues. As you see on the top right, that's a flooded road. If their dam gets overrun, they can create road flooding. They girdle trees. So if you have a nice condo complex and you have some nice trees and you have a beaver marsh nearby and they come up, they start eating your trees. So some people don't appreciate that. So while they can create and enhance wetland wildlife habitat, their activities do often cause conflict with human needs and desires, which unfortunately is true of a lot of our animal species. And we create a lot of the problems, but sometimes beavers do create a problem. These trees can be girdled or felled. Oftentimes they fall on a car, they might fall on a building. across the road. They might, fall in a septic system if they're too near houses. One of the most common complaints, though, in Connecticut is the plugging up of culverts that can cause property flooding and road driveway damage. It can be costly and frustrating for some landowners and others. I just had some people ask me, oh, we just planted these peach trees and we got a beaver marsh nearby, and we love the beavers. We want to keep the beavers there, but how are we going to keep them away from our trees? And I said, well, you got to put like a fence around them, not chicken wire either. So, but the trees are too small. They're not going to probably chew them now. But many of the problems with beavers are a direct result of human encroachment on their habitat. They're going to be expected, these problems, to increase as land in close proximity to wetlands is developed for residential, commercial, and industrial use. I encourage all of you, if you want to volunteer for anything, to either volunteer on your conservation commission, which by law in the state is usually an advisory commission. I'm the chairman of ours in here in Barkhamsted, but also inland wetlands in Muchtown. Inland wetlands keeps an eye on all building and making sure that it's not encroaching on endangered species or other things. So you can actually help monitor what is going on near these valuable environments. So standard setbacks from wetlands, you can watch on that, whether they're following the right setbacks and things like that. So one of the most significant conflicts, as I said, is them clogging up culverts. This man in Massachusetts invented what he called the beaver deceiver. And that's what this is. They put it in a culvert, and it does kind of keep the beaver debris from going through there. It works about, I'm told, about 60 to 65% of the time. So hopefully most towns try that first, because we used to trap beavers and relocate them, but they no longer do that because it just causes another problem somewhere else. So the policy is, if there's a beaver problem, the beaver will be trapped and euthanized. So the regular Connecticut beaver trapping season is from January 1st to March 31st and December 1st to December 31st. And I don't quite get that, because why don't they just say December 1st to March 31st, but they actually break it off like that. All the beaver have to be properly tagged before they're sold, exchanged, given away, or disposed of. So so solutions: wrap trees to protect them from being cut, but don't use chicken wire because they can cut right through it. You'll have to use a bigger gauge wire, or build like a fence around it, about 3 feet high. They can't really climb. So it's work, but it's like if you're going to have a chicken coop, or you're going to have bee hives, you have to protect them, those with electric fencing. But for a beaver, you just need a fence that they can't get to the tree. The beaver deceivers help lower pond elevation. So interesting facts. I've told you some of these. They're the only animal but us to fell large trees. They can cut over 200 trees in a year. This is their goo that smells like vanilla. The most interesting and odd fact is their sex is determined by expressing their anal sex. Female smells like cheese, males like motor oil, and I'm not making this up. So